Welcome back to another episode of The Hard Truth. Thank you so much for watching. You all are such an inspiration to me. You know, this Idaho 4 case has been going on a year, and the trial jurors are going to want to know the same things. They're going to have the same questions that we have as the general public. And if we don't have those answers for them, then it's going to be difficult for them to convict. All right, so let's talk about it. Grab that coffee or a nice cup of tea as we begin our story.
Well, Larry does a nice job of presenting the prosecutorial slant on this. The problem that the prosecution's got is that the prosecution is now going to be arguing, hey, there's no cell phone evidence that ties him to the location. Hey, there's no DNA that ties him to location other than touch on the sheath. Hey, we don't have any triangulation. And hey, he must have cleaned it up, even though we know he was in and out of there in a time period, as you might remember, Chris, that is getting increasingly compressed. And hey, by the way, we sealed the records in this case, or we asked the judge to seal the records because we thought there were other suspects, and lo and behold, what do we learn now? That there are not one, but two unidentified male specimens that arguably are at the scene. I beg to differ. I think other than the fact they've now made it a more pro-prosecution jury by asking for the death penalty, because you get more pro-prosecution jurors. Right. This is as big a bombshell as people are making it out to be.
But you get people who want more, too, if you're asking them to kill somebody.
I just left a discussion in the last video where they were talking about the DNA. It doesn't matter if the DNA reports of not finding DNA in Koberger's car or apartment is News Nation or court documents. The fact of the matter is, the hard truth is, if they had found DNA in any of Koberger's belongings, he would be on his way to death row right now. There would be no reason to offer him a plea deal. The prosecution would be sending this man to death row. And that's just a fact, because we have 4 students that lost their lives in a brutal manner. And if there was any forensic evidence to link this man to the victims, not to the home, to the victims, then there would be no reason to offer him a plea deal, because, all the bases would be covered. To me, that would be a smoking gun. Now, some would say, well, they have DNA on the sheath in the crime scene. Well, that's not the same thing as having Brian Koberger's DNA on any of the victims or having the victim's DNA in his belongings. That's not the same thing. All right? We can say that the DNA was planted. We can say that the DNA was transferred in some unofficial manner. It ended up on the sheath in some unconventional way. All right? And in that case, we would have to believe that he brought the sheath in his car that has no DNA and brought it into the house. And throughout all of this, there's only one speck of DNA on the sheath. That's a tough one for the jury. But if there was DNA in other places, Nancy Grace made a statement also that there should be DNA on all of the victims, not just the sheath, but also on the victims. If that's the case, if it's just a sheath under Maddie, then maybe they should only be charging Koberger with Maddie's death. I want to play just a little bit of a throwback from a video I made a couple of months ago. I slow down the voice so that you can hear what the person said the first time. I'm not slowing Nancy's voice down to degrade her. I'm slowing it down so that people can hear exactly what she said without having to rewind and play it again.
Was not the car. This is the car. Now, we understand that they have matched him up to DNA at the crime scene. It can't just be any DNA because that was a real party house. And is there anything wrong with that? Having a good time? But DNA at critical locations, such as in both the bedrooms, on all the bodies or more than one body. But DNA at critical locations, such as in both the bedrooms, on all the bodies or more than one body.
But the bottom line here is if they had found DNA in any of his belongings or on any of the victims, or they had found any of the victims' DNA in his possession or in his possessions, then this case would be a wrap. Okay, and this is a point for discussion. If you disagree, I welcome your insight. Maybe there's something that I'm overlooking here, but as it stands now, the jury is going to want to know how Brian Kohlberger came to be a suspect. All right, because if the DNA is on the sheet, where did you get his DNA from in the first place? All right, maybe the DNA proves that he's the person that did it, but how did he become a suspect? The same questions that we're asking as the general public, a trial juror is going to ask the same questions. And as it stands now, there aren't any answers. All right? There aren't any answers. I also wanted to talk briefly about the latest survey that I published on yesterday. And it says if the PCA timeline is destroyed at trial, that means, and 61% chose Kohlberger is innocent of all charges. I want to say that I agree that the timeline just doesn't work. The 4 to 420 doesn't work for the simple fact that there is a treasure trove of evidence and activity that takes place between 2 and 3:15 for a 2-mile radius around the crime scene. We have activity on Linda Lane. We've got people running from the home or in the general vicinity, 3 or 4 or 5 people carrying a package around 3:12 in the morning. We've got an officer recording the area on body cam from about 2:40 or 2:50 to after 3 a.m. So there's so much going on between 2 and about 3:15 that can't be ignored. That kind of negates the theory that this crime happened after 4 a.m. And so if the timeline is thrown out, Kohlberger is pretty much in the clear from 4 to 4:20. As far as him committing the crime before then, well, the prosecution's placing him in Pullman until 2:50 or 2:56. And so the PCA pretty much exonerates Kohlberger if 4 to 4:20 doesn't work. Now, what do you think about this one?